if Jake is innocent, I mean, like, Jake didn't do a thing. Maybe he hung out one time with her and they went bowling. And BYU suspended him for a year. And Jake's like, you guys suspended me for literally no reason. The other side of the coin is they play him. It does come out that these things did happen the way that she said they happened. It's going to be like a little bit of a stain on BYU. Hello and welcome to the Loyal Cougars podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, alongside Tosh Mackintosh. One of those rare instances where I'm actually home and Tosh is in office. We're not both in the Active Podcast studio, so we are doing a kind of a remote recording. Tosh, we didn't have an episode last week for Memorial Day. That was kind of planned, at least on my end. I honestly didn't think we were going to have a lot of news to talk about anyway, and so I was like, let's just take the day off. We both don't work, and so we might as well not have a show either. And then the biggest news of the offseason happened. Just dropped right before the show would have, not right before, but the week before the show would have dropped. So we got to talk about it today. But first of all, how was your Memorial Day weekend? I know you were in Idaho. How was your weekend?
Yeah, it was great. I took my boys out into the mountains of Idaho and had a lot of fun, and it was good bonding. But yeah, definitely it was a wild week in BYU sports with the Jake Retzlaff stuff, with announcements for BYU Basketball. We got a lot to talk about today, but absolutely, I loved a good break. Holiday weekend was much needed.
So you're downplaying a little bit. You told me you went bear hunting.
Yeah. I just didn't know how hardcore we wanted to get on this, but
I mean,
now that we're there, let's go there. So yeah, my 14-year-old son shot a bear, which was a big lifetime moment for him. That he likes hunting. He's never got anything, which most of hunting is not getting anything. But this time in Idaho, they've got a lot of bears, especially where we go. They got too high of bear numbers. So they sell over-the-counter bear tags to try to get the population down. So we went up there, and yeah, my young son got a bear, and his life will never be the same.
My people don't know this about me. My biggest, except for maybe my family, my biggest phobia is of bears, and it stems from when I was in an 11-year-old scouting. We went on a Klondike, just a winter camp, and I could have sworn that there was a bear outside of our tent. Which, looking back, it's like, why would a bear be wandering around in the middle of the night in the winter, like in November or December? But the sounds that I heard were actually my dad in the tent next door snoring. And then I'm pretty sure there was an animal outside that was like rubbing against our tent. It was probably like a deer or an elk or something, which would have been actually really cool to see. But we definitely heard, and honestly, it may have been just been a person walking outside of our tent. But
no, I agree. Bears freak me out a little bit. There's you got to give healthy respect to bears. They're big, powerful creatures.
Yeah. And we'll talk about a bear later in the show. How's that for a segue? But I want to start obviously with the big news of a couple weeks ago. And I think people kind of ad nauseum talked about already. So we're not going to talk a whole lot about, like, did he do it? Did he not do it? Like, obviously, we know the allegations. We know that Jake Retzlaff is being sued civilly for sexual abuse, and whether or not he did it, again, I think that's been talked about enough that we probably don't need to go into the weeds with that. But the question then becomes, what's kind of the future for Jake, and what's the future for BYU? And I want to start with the question of, did BYU know about this before it came out publicly? And I want your thoughts first.
So I think it depends what we mean by did BYU know. So we've heard that Kalani and most people around BYU Athletics were surprised and found out the same time that we found out. That when the Salt Lake Trib article dropped, it seems like it sent shockwaves through the athletic program. And I believe that. I have also heard some things, though, that I haven't been able to totally, validate, that BYU's Title IX department may have heard something enough that they did an investigation into this months past, were not able to find anything, and so they kind of moved on. I've heard that as well. both things could be true. I don't know what they're required to tell the staff, especially if they weren't able to validate or come up with anything through their investigation. But I've heard that a lot of the big people at BYU were totally surprised. And I've also heard that the Title IX department may have heard something enough to do an investigation, but it didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so take that for what it's worth.
So, and from my side of this, I was talking with some people at BYU TV because coincidentally enough, Jake Retzlaff was doing a segment where he's talking about a trip to Jerusalem, right? The day that this was released. And I think the article itself was published around 1 p.m. around right around lunchtime, just after lunchtime, when it was publicly announced. And Jake's interview would have been that morning. And what I had heard is that BYU's SID Kenny Cox, who he's kind of the sports information department are the guys that handle the athletics department from a PR standpoint. And so they go to media interviews with the players. They're always with the coaches. They're making sure that they're not being asked questions that are inappropriate, and they're making sure that they're answering questions in an appropriate way. And so Kenny is with Jake for this interview on BYU Sports Nation, as he would be sitting in the green room. He gets a text. I don't know who the text was from. I didn't get that information. Probably from Kevin Reynolds, to be honest. The guy on at least the BYU sports writer for the Salt Lake Tribune, and was a co-author of this article. He probably sent it to Kenny as almost like a, hey, we're going to publish this article later today. Do you have any comment on it? Because that's pretty standard practice to get comment from the university. I imagine Kenny said no comment, but that was, from what I had heard, that was the first that he had even heard about this article coming out. Now, again, to your point, like, does that mean that he didn't know about any sort of incident? I don't know. Again, it sounds like Kalani didn't know, but they did not know I know for a fact they did not know this article was coming out until the morning of when it came out. Yeah. So that said, there was a tweet that came out, or an X post that came out, and this is from Fullshare Utah fan. He says, whether or not Jake Retzlaff is guilty, the fact that Santiago lied by saying he didn't find out about this news until all the other football teams found out about it the same time is absolute bull crap. He didn't say crap. Jake got an attorney, probably funded through BYU, and they were all told about this information before so they could make an official statement. Everybody knows that's how it works. So this is very speculative, obviously.
Yeah. And
I'm very tempted to make this our Shut the F Up post of the week.
Shut the F up!
Because it's just like it's just nonsense. Like it's hard to read something like that and be like, this guy actually knows what he's talking about, because it's just very speculative. The other thing I'll say too is that it seems like the people that care the most about BYU's perception right now at this point in time are Utah fans.
For sure.
Right? Yeah. Because they're the ones that want BYU to come out yesterday, to suspend Jake, to release a statement about what happens. Like they're the only ones that really care. I think BYU fans right now are just kind of like, let's let it settle. Let's let it die. Let's figure out like actually what happened. Let's do an investigation. And if it comes down to it and BYU doesn't find anything, if they do their own internal investigation, don't find any sort of factual evidence to these claims, then we can make a decision. I think Utah fans are like, BYU's reputation and the honor code office, there's a lot at stake here. And it's like, you guys are the only ones that actually care about that.
They would love anything that knocks BYU down a peg. I think that it's been tricky for them to see BYU's incredible rise over the last couple of years. Where I'm at on it, and I think I speak for most BYU fans on this, is I want the truth to prevail. I want justice to prevail for whoever the victim is. And if this girl is the victim, then I absolutely want justice to prevail for her. There is a chance that Jake is the victim here. And if that's the truth, then I want justice to prevail for him. And I know that's kind of a Switzerland answer, but that's where I'm at. And so I do think that you have to let it play out a little bit to find out where the truth is and how justice should prevail. On that note, it makes things tricky for this year's football season. And a lot of people initially thought BYU is going to separate from him immediately. Like, I think the prevailing thing when that article came out is people thought within hours or days, Jake Retzlaff is going to make a statement that he's stepping away from the program for a while, and that would maybe be a forced conversation to push it that direction. But here we are, I don't know how many days later, but it feels like 2 weeks later, and there's nothing. And so there's a lot we don't know right now. But one thing we do know is that no announcements have been made. BYU and Jake Retzlaff have not separated themselves from each other publicly in any way. And so it's curious. I'm curious what that means, if anything.
Yeah, the only thing that's really officially come out is the statement from Jake's lawyer, which I thought was worded hilariously, where it was like, I've met Jake. He's a nice guy. It's like, you obviously just met him like this morning. You didn't know about him until just now. So that was the only official statement coming out from Jake's camp. And then the only really official statement that came out from BYU, I don't even think we have an official press release. I saw this on a post from, I think it was KSLSports.com, where Brian Santiago was answering a question, and he was very diplomatic. And I actually thought it was kind of the response that I would have expected, which was, this is a private matter. We're respecting Jake's privacy. We're letting the appropriate channels handle this. And, we'll make the appropriate decision when it comes, type of thing. But, obviously he acknowledged that it's an unfortunate situation for everyone involved. And, they want to be able to make the right decision. What's tough is that BYU's kind of put in this tough position, because if Jake is innocent, and when I say innocent, I mean like Jake didn't do a thing, right? Doesn't even know this girl. Maybe he hung out one time with her and they went bowling, for all we know, right? Like, if Jake is completely innocent and none of this happened, and BYU suspends him for a year, because we're not going to get a civil case until January, right? Like, so BYU has to do their own internal investigation and come up with their own conclusion, really, before the case even goes to trial, assuming it does. And so that's like best case scenario for Jake, but worst case scenario for BYU, because they suspend him for a year, and Jake's like, you guys suspended me for literally no reason. Yeah. And I don't know what the legal repercussions for that is, but like, Jake could potentially go after BYU in that case, because let's be honest, like if BYU suspends him for this year and they get Ryder Lyons, or even if Bear Bachmeier's ready to go next year, then you run into this issue of like, is Jake even your quarterback next year?
Yeah,
assuming it's for a year. Now, the other side of the coin is they play him, right? Let's say they play him, and we find out in January or next summer that this trial, and that's not to necessarily prove his guilt, but because it's a civil case, right? It's not criminal. But let's say it does come out that these things did happen the way that she said they happened, and BYU played him for a year. That does look bad on BYU, on the perception of BYU, and then BYU fans do start caring about that perception. And some will try and brush it off and be like, well, BYU did what they thought was right and blah, 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 all that stuff. But the reality is, like, opposing teams are going to use that. Opposing coaches are going to use that against, and honestly, the national media is going to hone in on that. And that's going to be a storyline probably for the next at least 1 or 2 years, maybe 5-10 years. Like, it's going to be like a little bit of a stain on BYU. So you have to make the right decision, and you have to make it before this thing even goes to trial. And I think that's where, BYU is in a bad spot.
Absolutely. It would be the talking point at some level to every game that we run Jake out there for. And that's the PR position that's a nightmare for the whole program, from a distraction standpoint, from the church doesn't not want that to be a talking point for every BYU game. And it really makes it tricky. And I go back and forth a little bit on whether I think Jake will play this season, but that's the scenario that makes me still think there's a high likelihood that he doesn't play. If it doesn't get resolved, it is a PR and talking point and distraction nightmare for the whole season. And so, yeah, like to me, I think BYU needs to make a decision before fall camp starts. And I don't know the date on that. It's usually about a month before the first game. It's usually somewhere like right at the beginning of August. So we have roughly 2 months, I think, for BYU to actually have to make a decision on what 2025 BYU football and Jake Retzlaff look like.
Yeah, I think it's about 4 weeks before the first week of the season they get a fall camp, and early indications were that BYU was planning on not having Jake available. And when I say BYU, I mean the coaching staff. And I think they were kind of playing it safe. I don't think they necessarily knew what was going to happen, but that they were ultimately planning for the worst. And so I think they're at a point right now where Jake's not with the team. Like I don't think he's practicing with the team. I don't think he's doing any sort of like off-season drills with the team. I think he's kind of just in hiding pretty much until this gets somewhat resolved. But that's kind of where BYU is at right now. And you mentioned the church wanting this to get resolved as quickly as possible. This has gone to the top, right? First presidency. And, to the point where I'm not gonna say specifically who, but I've been told that like the Deseret News, they're not allowing any of their sports guys to even talk about this on like with me, for example. Like they're not allowing them to go on TV or radio or podcasts to even talk about this, right? They're basically trying to keep this as low key as possible and trying to get it resolved as quickly as possible. But again, I don't see it. And to be honest, if I'm put in this situation, if I'm Coach Sitake or Brian Santiago for that matter, like I honestly feel like you cannot play Jake until you know for a fact that he is innocent. And honestly, innocence could look like, Jake, didn't abuse or the R word, didn't do anything illegal per se. It's something that you could pursue him in a criminal case, but that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't break the honor code, right? Like he still could have done, consensual things and still be suspended. So you almost
and it also brings up and it puts in a little bit of a spotlight that the honor code and its enforcement, the enforcement of the honor code is not what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when every season there would be some guys seemingly kicked off or suspended for seasons for honor code violations. If you rack your brain, there's been 0 of those over like the last decade. That doesn't mean there's still not people breaking the honor code. It seems like they made a decision to not embarrass the player or when there's an honor code violation. And it's not just players. This has been even students that are not athletes. Yes. They let people finish the semester. They let people finish the season to not make a bad situation worse and throw someone. And I'm in support of that. I do think some of the people that have entered the portal have actually been because there was an honor code situation, and that was the best for both of, hey, you're gone after this season. We're not going to publicly say why you're gone. You should just enter the portal. Like, I think that's how it's been done. This situation's different, though, because it's so public. Yes. And it does, if he's openly saying that it was consensual, it does put BYU in a position where it's already public. And I'd be curious, what does that mean? Does that mean he gets suspended for a game, 4 games, a season? Like that, it'll be interesting. It's putting the honor code and its enforcement back in the spotlight.
Yeah. And I think that's probably why we haven't had any sort of official statement from Jake of whether or not it was consensual. Right now, we don't have anything, right? And, the 2 cases that come to mind are Brandon Davies and Harvey Unga. And those guys, like you mentioned, that became public. And, I think at the time that was BYU's policy, is that like, there's no second chances, right? You mess up. And in Brandon's case, twice, right? Because, as we know, But Harvey also, and the thing with Brandon and Harvey is that they got women. There were repercussions. There were children out of this. People got pregnant, and that's probably not the case with Jake. We don't know. Maybe we'll figure out in 9, or I guess it was last November, so we'll figure out soon.
Longer, so there would have already been a kid, so probably not. But
yeah, but anyway, so it's just different, right? And to your point, like. And we had Brian Logan on, I think 3 weeks ago, and he basically said the same thing, because there was this kind of perception among Big 12 fans that the honor code dissuades people from coming to BYU, and I think to some extent they may have a good point, but I think it also persuades a lot of parents to send their kids to BYU. And again, his point was that, like, the honor code exists, but it doesn't stop people, right? It doesn't, like, people are going to do what they want. And that's, obviously the law exists too, and people still break the law, and there's repercussions for that. But it doesn't, I think people break the honor code and we just don't hear about it. And to your point, like maybe there are repercussions, but they're just not public anymore. And Jake's case, the only reason it's become public is because it's, it was reported by a local newspaper and is now kind of in the limelight. But I'm curious.
Go ahead.
I'm curious to see how this plays out. And again, I think it's just going to be a slow moving process. I think the longer we wait to hear any sort of official statement from BYU or Jake Retzlaff, the more likely it is for him to probably play, to be honest.
Agreed. And I think that's the safest bet. If we're just looking at it from a football standpoint, Jake Retzlaff on a 1 to 10 last year, he was a 6.5. But from a continuity standpoint, from a step in the right direction, that is BYU football's best option from a football standpoint, is that to trot him out there. And I have confidence he could be a 7.5. Or if he's an 8, we have a magical season. If he's not the one that's running out there this season, what do you think, Jake, of our options of who BYU could run out there to sling the football?
Well, there's 3 of them, right? Like, it's not a very deep quarterback room. We've got there's McKay Hillstead, there's Bear Bachmeier, and there's Trayson Bourget. And I think coming into this season, McKay Hillstead was the kind of penciled in backup, and Trayson was the 3rd string. And then in the offseason, and the timing of this is perfect, right? Because Bear Bachmeier comes in. Very capable high school quarterback coming in as a freshman, transfer from Stanford, never played. He played spring ball with the Cardinal, and then transferred after Troy Williams got let go at Stanford. Obviously brings his brother. Great news. And now it's just even more impactful now that, you have to rely on him at least for depth at the quarterback position. But I'm with you. I think Jake had the potential. And the thing with Jake is the continuity. And I already said that I was pretty bullish on Jake just because he's been with this offense for a year and a half. And he knows his receivers. He knows who to throw to. He knows his offensive line. Like, Jake was a capable quarterback. I'm not going to say he was a Heisman caliber quarterback coming into the season. He's not a Taysom Hill. He's not a Zach Wilson or Jaron Hall, but he was a capable quarterback, and that's really all we need with the guys that we have around him on offense and our defense. We just needed a capable guy, and so you lose him, and you kind of lose that continuity that would have helped. That said, so you've got McKay Hillstead still on the team, Bear Bachmeier, Trayson Bourget. I'm going to run through these guys. So McKay Hillstead, again, kind of your penciled in backup. I'm a little hesitant with McKay. Now, I loved McKay Hillstead at Skyridge. That kid was a baller, and he made defenses look silly, led his team to a state championship. The only issue I have with McKay, actually a couple issues, he's undersized, 5'10". He doesn't have an incredibly strong or an incredibly accurate arm, but he's a fantastic runner. So to me, he's like a right-handed Riley Nelson. And, Riley was a serviceable quarterback as a senior. So maybe you're okay with that.
I think that he is a run first. I think his legs are his best D1 quarterback attribute. I think he throws a better deep ball than Riley Nelson, though. He's more capable, and I actually think he throws a better deep ball than Jake Retzlaff. That was Jake's weakness. I don't know. He doesn't have Brett Favre's arm, but when I watch his film, he throws. He's more confident and throws a more accurate deep ball than those guys. He to me is like the biggest like spark plug of these three, which I followed Utah State fairly closely because I'm friends with the Legaw family, and Cooper Legaw was right there battling with him at the quarterback position. So I actually saw a lot of his games, and he was similar to Riley Nelson. He was just this spark plug of energy, and that's with his running and his enthusiasm, and he's just this little guy who's just feisty. That's what he brings to the table.
Yeah. And Cooper wasn't, I think he actually beat out Cooper for that starting job, right? And Cooper's
kind of went back and forth, but yeah, absolutely. For a lot of the season, he did.
Yeah. By the way, shout out to Jen Legaw, who we work with. She's fantastic. Always has great insights on Cooper. But yeah, McKay. So McKay, I agree. He's the spark plug. He's going to be your high energy guy. Again, I think he's kind of a gritty, very much like Riley Nelson. Like I look at him and I'm like, that guy, his demeanor, his mannerisms, he's a right-handed Riley Nelson. So he is, I think he's capable. I just worry about his size. But if he can take care of the football, like his size won't really matter. And again, Riley managed to, have a pretty successful career at BYU despite his size. Number 2 to me is going to be Bear Bachmeier. And this is another big question mark because we've never seen him. And the biggest downside with Bear is that he didn't get a spring with BYU. So he's now, I'm pretty sure he's at BYU now. So he can start throwing with his receivers. I'm sure he's throwing with his brother. But I think Bear has the biggest upside among all three guys. 6'2", played, recruited by Stanford. And to me, he looks very much like a more capable pocket passer. He's a strong thrower. I will say he does seem to hold on to the ball a little bit too long in the pocket, but he's accurate. He throws a pretty good deep ball. Not a particularly great runner. Now, I think he ran well in high school because every D1 quarterback can run well in high school. Like it's pretty, you're basically, it's a man against boys sometimes. And so I think he was fine as a runner. I don't think he's going to run a lot of BYU or at the D1 level at all, but he's a very capable pocket passer. Based on the film that I saw.
4-star guy. Out of these guys, he's the only one that I think has NFL potential that he could work into. He's a true freshman who he's never practiced with BYU's system. That's what, to me, he's a really risky day one starter. I think at some point, maybe this year, I think that people are excited about him for next year. Absolutely. Does he have the physical attributes? Yes. It's a lot going from high school to real football, and you're the starter out there.
Yeah. And you've got Portland State week 1. To be honest, that's a perfect game to ease him in. If he it wins the starting job, I'm fine with him playing against Portland State. Stanford at home, I think that's, winnable as well. You go to East Carolina. I hate road games. We've gone through the schedule before. Then you go to Colorado, and I just don't know if he's ready by week 4, by September 27th. So again, a big question mark. I do think he has the biggest upside, but I question his ability to come in. He was meant to be next year's guy, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's ready to go. The third guy then is Trayson Bourget. And Trayson, what he brings is the experience. So if you're worried about Bear Bachmeier, if you're worried about McKay Hillstead being younger, and I know McKay has some D1 experience, but if you're worried about guys having experience, then Trayson's probably who you want. So he was with the team last year. He didn't get any playing time, played at Western Michigan before that. Not a ton of playing time at Western Michigan. I think he only played 10 games, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Again, not a running quarterback, but a pretty good pocket passer. He seems to have a really good deep ball and throws it well across the middle. I think most of his passes that I saw on film were across the middle or kind of deep fade routes along the sideline. And I think that's where he specializes in.
Yeah. And I don't know much about him. So I do trust the coaches to evaluate these guys. I would be surprised if he's the starter because I hear more hype about McKay Hillstead, and McKay was also with the team this last offseason.
Yeah.
But it's going to be one of those three. If it's not Jake, it's one of those three. So
well there's only three to choose from, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe they got practice squad guys, but that's your depth chart. And it actually kind of reminds me of I have PTSD from like Coy Detmer, the Bo Hodge, Coy Detmer. Who was the other guy? Was it Tanner that got hurt that year or somebody? They had like 3 or 4 guys on their roster.
Yeah.
And they burned through all of them. And, I think that's kind of a one-off, once in a generation type of situation, but you worry, man. Like I worry that we're going to have, 3 hurt quarterbacks and we're going to have to roll in like Parker Kingston at quarterback or somebody.
Our defense gives me a lot of faith. Our O-line should be good. Our running back group, our receivers. So we are in a different place of who we're putting around these guys than some of those awful years we have PTSD about.
This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit AptivPestControl.com/loyal Cougars or call 844-966-4787. Mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's AptivPestControl.com/loyal Cougars or call 844-966-4787. Terms and conditions apply. Get home field advantage with Aptiv. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. Let's move on to basketball. We've got a little bit of time left, and I wanted to talk about kind of the big news in basketball this week because let's talk about something positive, right? There's been a lot of positive news around basketball. Honestly, there's been some positive news around football too. This is just the one bad thing. I did have a dream, by the way, last night that BYU lost AJ DeBonsa, like he was suspended for a year or something, and it was like I was miserable. It was like a nightmare. I hated it. Glad I woke up and glad it wasn't real. But the news this week is that BYU scheduled UConn at TD Garden in Boston. And I think and Kevin Young said this last year that they weren't really prepared well enough going into Big 12 play. Their non-conference schedule was just too soft, that they were just caught off guard when they entered Big 12 play, and that showed. And I would even say that even their harder non-conference games, they just weren't ready for them because they weren't being challenged enough. And so I love what they're doing. UConn's one of like 6 marquee games that they have in the offseason, not including their exhibition games, which I'm really excited for as well.
So to me, last year, our staff wasn't really ready for college basketball, and the team was so new, and our best player, Yegor, he like in our big games preseason, he was just getting out physicaled and outmatched. So to me, what's going to be new this year? We still have a freshman phenom. I think he's physically more prepared for American basketball at this level than Yegor was. And I think our staff is at a place we got to be though careful what we wish for. Like these are games BYU could lose. And, but I love that being said, I love it. Let's take on the big games. If we win these, it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. And I suspect we'll win our fair share of these really big matchups.
Yeah. And we've learned, especially now that they're in a major conference, you can lose some non-conference games in November. Like it's not a big deal if you lose to a Wisconsin or if you lose to a UConn. It just doesn't, it's not that. Now, if you win those games, you're a top you could potentially be a top seed in the NCAA tournament. If you lose those games, I don't think you fall farther than 3 or 4 in the NCAA tournament, depending on how you do in conference play. So these games to me and I think Kevin Young views them as more of just primers. They've got to get ready for Big 12 play. And so they've got to play good teams. And, so let's just talk about the regular season non-conference games. Villanova in Vegas, UConn at TD Garden, Wisconsin, Sans John Tonje, thank goodness, right? Going to the NBA. They play Wisconsin, the Delta Center. And then this was kind of like under the radar, at least for me, was the announcement of this 2025 Terry's Chocolate ESPN Events Invitational. It's like a 16-team 3-bracket tournament. BYU is in the same bracket as Miami, Georgetown, and Dayton. And so they'll play 2 of those teams. Those are all regular season, not to mention the exhibition games against North Carolina at the Delta Center and then at Nebraska, which, again, those are primers even before the non-conference games. Those are just exhibition games that don't even matter, don't even count towards overall record, but they just get you ready for the season. These are all great teams against great players that they're going to get BYU ready for the Big 12.
And fun places like the one in Boston, in the one in Florida. There's also both sides have been out enough that it's like a not so secret anymore. Is BYU's playing Clemson in Madison Square Garden in New York. I'm not sure on the date, but that's another game that's going to happen. And so a lot of fun games in fun places. And it just signals to big time recruits that BYU is a legitimate big time program. Yes. And if you want to play on TV, if you want to play in fun venues, that we want to have a hype schedule that's getting talked about by TV and radio all the time, BYU is a place you can do that.
So the other big news this last week was Kennard Davis, and we've talked about Kennard Davis before. This is when it was kind of released or reported on, not officially announced, but Kennard Davis officially signing with BYU. And it's big news because I think there was a lot of question about whether Kennard would actually be eligible to play at BYU. I think he was still at school. I think it was SIU. Trying to get eligible. And I'm sure Kevin Young played a big role in that, and probably calling him every day, making sure he was getting himself eligible. But that was up in the air. So Kennard Davis officially signing at BYU, I think finally puts that final piece to at least their starting lineup. I don't believe they're done. I think they still have a couple roster spots to fill. I could be wrong, but Kennard Davis is a huge piece to that starting lineup that I think they needed. So that's big news for the week.
Yeah, for sure. Like he's gonna be one of our key players to the season. I think he adds a lot of depth, and he's better than people realize.
Yes, and then this kind of, I don't even know how this came about. I think it was a video that somebody posted or somebody reported on, but BYU implementing a 4-point line. What do you think about a 4-point line, Tosh?
Well, I think it would be fun. It would be fun to try it out. It feels a little gimmicky, but in real game scenarios. But hey, let's the NBA regular season viewership is down. Let's try to mess with it. The other side of it, though, well, let's go to football. The NFL changes their rules like every year. Like the kickoffs, new overtime rules they're always changing it. And then on the other side, you have baseball that's like hates to change anything, but look which ones are going which. Like, I think that basketball's in the middle. They shouldn't be afraid to be innovative. All that being said, the BYU 4-point line, from everything I gather, is actually just more for them to practice spacing.
Yes.
And it just shows their guys that teams have gotten better at defending out to the 3-point line. But if you are dialed in your spacing and your ability to attack from a few feet past that, it can put a lot of pressure on the defense. And so that's why they've drawn 4-point lines for spacing and practicing purposes in our annex.
Yeah, I think when I first heard about this, it felt gimmicky, at least from a practice perspective. It felt like just a thing to keep the players engaged, keep it fun. But the more I think about it, and the way Kevin Young described it, is that it does introduce spacing. The other thing it does is it gets her ready for the NBA, right? Because the 3-point line is a little bit further back in the NBA. And if players are so used to shooting from a college 3-point line, then, you take a few steps back, or a couple, 1 or 2 steps back, maybe your shots, just your muscle memory is off a little bit. And so if you introduce this 4-point line, it almost like negates the difference between college and NBA in terms of 3-point line. And it allows for players to, it also allows for it gives players the green light to shoot from that far away in a game, where I think some players are just hesitant. Like, I think even like a guy like Trevin Nell, who is a phenomenal 3-point shooter, he shot a lot from the corner. And I don't think he shot a lot from like 3 or 4 feet behind the 3-point line, because that just wasn't where he was comfortable. Even though he was a 3-point specialist, he wasn't Jimmer, right? And so if you introduce this 4-point line, you almost allow everybody to think like Jimmer. That's not to say that everyone's going to shoot like Jimmer, but it at least gives them kind of this mentality of, hey, I can shoot this far from practice, even though it's worth more points. I'm going to try it in a game, and I'm going to hit a few of them.
No player should shoot shots that they haven't practiced a lot and have confidence they can make. And this, I think, is just we're going to have more players out there that have proven to themselves and their coaches that they can hit from there. And so if the guy's not guarding them, they should shoot it.
Yeah. By the way, there's a reason why Steph Curry takes these kind of crazy shots in either in practice or a pregame. Like, he's not taking them just for fun. He's taking them to practice wild shots, because he knows he's going to be in a point in a game where he's going to have to take a wild shot, a half-court shot or a 3/4 court shot. And like, the more reps you can get, like, sure, it's not going to be every minute of every game. A half-court shot usually comes at the end of a half or end of a quarter. But if you can get those reps in, when you're put in that situation, you're ready to go. Like, you're more capable and more likely to hit that shot than if you didn't practice it at all. So I think bringing it back to the 4-point line, having that 4-point line, it's funny, like, years ago, that was dumb, right? That was like a dumb strategy, was to practice shots that you're not going to take in a game. But the reality is, like, more and more of those types of shots are getting taken in a game. And so if you can get that much practice in on those shots, even if it is a little gimmicky, I think it helps.
We should absolutely trust Kevin Young. There's no reason not to. Yes. Until he proves us otherwise, I'll go with what he says. What I'm looking for is, I'm thinking probably in the next few months across the globe, church gyms are going to go in and paint 4-point lines. It's the start of a trend, the start of a revolution, if you will. The 4-point line, Kevin Young.
I'll start it at my church building. You can start it at yours, and we'll get the trend going.
There we go.
Okay, Tosh, thanks for hopping on today. As always, it's a pleasure. Let's do this again.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, this is the Locked On, or Loyal Cougar. I keep saying Locked On. When Jake was on last time, Jake Hatch, I almost said Locked On Cougars podcast, like as if I'm like now part of Jake Hatch's show. I got to get out of that habit. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds. Tosh Mackintosh joining me today. We'll see you next week.